Hi everyone, and welcome to my presentation on ELT inclusion and technology. As we all know, to this day and age, education is changing. There's so many things, so many new tools out there, but we still have the issue of inclusion. Are we making the best? Are we making the most of the tools that we have? Are we using them to the best of their ability? And are we really using them with the purpose of including our students? Are we really thinking about how we can move forward to help our students? So the first thing we need to think about is the paradigm itself. We need to have a change in the paradigm of our education. In the first stage, we can see here in the first image, equality. When we give, for example, this image shows 3 children of different heights. And if we think about that, we have them, each of them in a box. And then the whole idea of being given the same thing. Now, what happens by the students receiving the same? The student who's already very tall has made really no difference, has he? He still sees, he has no issues, but there's nothing extra for him. There's nothing that we've actually made the most of. Whereas the middle child, we can see that he finally can get to see what the others were seeing, whereas the shortest child is still not enough for him. When we think about equity, here we see the tall child still being able to watch the game, the middle child being able to watch the game, and the youngest one as well. But what happened? We gave nothing to the tallest child, and we gave everything to the youngest one. So what we see here is that these 2 children here are making the most of it. We are helping those, but we are still not helping that taller child to go beyond. So what we are proposing here is the change of paradigm of liberation. What is it that is preventing these 3 children from watching the game? It was the fence. How many times do we realize that this is what we should be thinking about? Now, this image I remember I saw in a talk by Phil Dexter, which really opened my eyes into what I did in inclusion in my classroom. In this classroom, think about what we're doing in the classroom. We might be giving more handouts, we might be giving more specific feedbacks, different things, which I'm not going to criticize because I think it's fantastic. But are we really removing the barriers? Are we actually stopping and analyzing the barriers that are causing different things in my classroom? Because what we know is that this is what liberation is removing whatever it is that's preventing me from learning. And this is what we should be thinking about. And this is what is universal design for learning. So it's the educational framework that maximizes the learning opportunities for all learners. And this is what the key part is, that it's for all learners. It's not just for the youngest 2, the shortest 2. It's also for the tallest one. It enables the taller one to also be able to go beyond this. And it's based on the 3 principles. Okay, so there are 3 principles of design of UDL. You might have heard of it before. And the basic idea is that we need to abide by these 3 different principles in order to be able to make learning for all possible. So this means, for example, multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and the multiple means of engagement. These are the 3 pillars of UDL that when we follow them, when we understand fully what we are thinking of, is we are able to go beyond and really have that education for all that we all desire. So it's just really what we should be doing now. So we've got these principles, but what else should I be looking at in order to be able to make the most of the context of my classroom? Is to really think about the barriers. Have you identified the barriers in your classroom? Can you think of what is preventing your learners? What is it that's preventing your learners to move forward? There are some key barriers that you might experienced. Some are quite normal, but these ones in particular are the ones that we see in all the classrooms. We have issues with working memory. Our students may struggle with this working memory. We also have the use of language. We have the added difficulty of our students using a second language, second or third language, or even more. Concentration. I think personally, this is probably one of the most difficult ones that I face every day in my classroom is concentration. Are our students concentrating enough? How are they organizing their work? Especially today, many of you might have computers in the classroom, you have phones, you have things. How are they organizing their work? And of course, we have the learning preferences as well. We're not talking about learning styles because learning styles is nowadays, it's been discredited because of visual, audio, kinesthetic. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the preferences of how we learn, how we explore this, not putting them in a box separate. So all of these barriers in the classroom have, of course, some realities that have to do with our subjects, but also might have some psychological aspects. So, for example, concentration. Why is it that they aren't concentrating? Is it because maybe the classroom is not in the ideal moment? Or could it be any other issues that they might have at home? Could they have, maybe they've had a fight, maybe they just fought with a friend in the classroom. All of these things do create these barriers in the classroom. And this is why a lot of the times we are told that we need to lower the affective filters, get students ready for the learning environment, get them prepared for the learning task at hand. And it has to do with all of these natural barriers that we face day to day. But with working memory, use of language, organization of work, all of these things, we can make a difference. We can make tweaks into our classroom, into our practices, in order to help our students overcome these barriers without us teachers doing all the extra work. I'm a big fan of education for all. I think that all students have the right to education, but also have the ability to be educated. I strongly believe that it doesn't matter your background, your age, or whatever, you will achieve higher levels of learning, maybe not at the same pace. But it's because there's so many issues with learning today that we need to make sure that we can identify the barriers, remove the barriers in order to help our students continue. And so what we need to do is we need to think about these barriers that we've got and how can we use these principles from UDL to overcome these barriers, to help our students move forward. Because the first thing is, the first way to find a solution is to find the problem. My recommendation would be is look in your classroom. Which of these barriers are you finding? Which of these particular barriers do you think are, if you can find reasons why? For example, I remember I used to have a classroom next to the stairs. My concentration and my students' concentration was out the window in the first 5 seconds of the classroom, and I would not be able to get them back until if somebody walked down the stairs, I knew that that was going to be a problem. In 2 seconds, I lost my students. So how can we overcome those barriers? So this is why I'm a big fan of reflecting and don't go into problem-solving mode so quickly. Let's stop and analyze what is happening. Teachers are known for fast action, and this is probably why we get so tired because we are constantly putting out fires. This is a fire that we need to put out for sure, but it's not going to be done overnight. We need to stop and analyze what is happening in the classroom, what the barriers are, and if we can identify them, it's going to be easier. So I had a group of students who had difficulty concentrating. Now, these students in particular, it was a large group, and probably I would say around 40% of my students had ADHD. attention deficit disorder. They were also with hyperactivity. So it was a bit of a challenge. And that was a classroom that was next to the stairs. For me, it was hell because the windows, people go up and down the stairs, and I can't stop asking, and I can't tell, please stop going down the stairs. It wasn't a possibility. So the solution we found it was quite simple, but the only way that we got to that solution was to stopping and analyzing what was going on. It was easy to blame the fact that 40% of my students had ADHD. Very easy to blame. Now, by identifying that, how can I overcome that? These kids have these issues. I need to be able to find solutions, but it wasn't their conditions that was, making them lose concentration. It was the fact that I was next to the stairs, and so we just put up curtains. It was something so simple as that. Before I got the curtains up, I just put, I just covered it. I just covered. I was complicate my life in that sense. So let's stop and analyze to see why those barriers are really a problem so we can find solutions using the UDL principles that are extremely useful, especially in these contexts. So let's think about how we can combine these principles of UDL to the barriers that we have in the classrooms. There are many barriers that we need to overcome. We know that it's not an easy task. We know that there are many more of these barriers, but how can we overcome them with the use of these principles? If we have a look here, working memory, use of language, the concentration, organization of work, and learning preferences can all be covered using the different principles. You might use others that I have put here. All three really could go in each part. I just focused on each of the aspects that could help us along the way. Because when I have issues with working memory, maybe I need to work on multiple means of representation. If I have issues of the use of language, and let's face it, we're guaranteed to have this issue because we are English teachers. We are teaching in another language that is not their mother tongue. They probably don't speak it at home. They don't speak it in their context, and they might not have moments, or they might not have that exposure that it would have been ideal to learn a second language, second, third, or whatever language. Concentration, with concentration, representation and means of engagement might be the things that we need to focus on in order to get our students more more engaged and working with us. Organization of work. If we have these multiple means of actions and expressions, it will enable us to move forward. And of course, we've got these learning preferences. The learning preferences, it's clear that all three principles are there. So based on these barriers, how can we move forward? So first, we need to really identify and understand what these multiple means of representation, action, expression, engagement are all about. What do these three principles really represent? So in the first principle, the multiple means of representation, is the whole idea of presenting information in multiple media. Multiple media does not mean that it's PowerPoint presentation. Oh, I need a projector, I need a computer. No, it's presenting information in different forms, not just one way of showing information. You need to vary the support. Students, your students. You know which students need a bit more support. You know which students maybe with a few notes is enough. Use graphics, activate background knowledge, highlight important features, support vocabulary. All of these are multiple means of representation. So this principle in particular is talking about how information is shown, is presented to our students. Then we need to think about the actions and expression. How are we letting our students show us what they already know? Do we provide models? Do we have the feedback according to their proficiency? And this is the key part. Feedback according to their proficiency. We tend to forget a lot about this. So for example, maybe you don't give the same feedback to a struggling student to those who are a little bit more excelled. Think about the first image I showed you of the three boys. The tallest student doesn't need those squares, but maybe you could tell them something else. You could give them feedback so they could see other aspects that maybe the other two children couldn't have seen. It's allowing that everybody can grow regardless of where they are. You have your minimum. So you know this is the minimum. This is where everybody should be at the end of the year. Some will be here, some will be here, others will be there, but we don't want anyone down here. And that doesn't mean lowering the standards. It's changing the feedback. It's changing the way of how we can help our students to get there to using these principles. So the student, for example, I always had, we don't teach. I don't think I've ever taught the same level. I mean, I have the same level. I have English A, for example, and you would assume English A is advanced. So would I. But even within the advanced, we have different levels. We have better speakers, better writers, better whatever. So my feedback tends to go according to their level of proficiency to see if I can give them a bit of a push. I sometimes, maybe if you look at one of my writings, I overcorrect a certain student. And that is true. I do. Because I know that student in particular is what they want. It's what they need. And because they're getting to that fine stage of real language analysis and language understanding. So, yes, this chunk of language is correct, but not within this context. These sort of things that I'm talking about. And of course, then we need the multiple means of engagement. We need to give students choices to interest their autonomy. But, and this is a big but that doesn't mean that we don't develop other areas. If the student is a strong speaker, fantastic, but I still need him or her to become a better writer. So it doesn't mean that I ignore one. It's just the fact is that maybe you all have to do writing. Maybe it's a writing task that you're all doing. And then those who would like to can support it with a speaking task. Those of you who would like can add maybe more of a creative touch to it. So I write a lot of essays because of my level I teach, the level of my students and the context and the syllabus. And I miss creative writing. So now and again, I give them options of creative writing or create or come up and give a presentation. I try to move things around because I can't constantly do, it's not everything always aimed at the final exam. I need to vary, and I want my students to develop, not equally, because I don't think it's impossible to develop equally all our skills, but I'd still want to make sure that they all improve in their skills somehow. So with working memory, remember that we said that we can use different the different principles to help these barriers. So when we think of working memory, we're talking about the whole idea of really not having that quick working memory, because when that short-term memory, to go into the long term, we need to have a bit of maybe a longer short-term memory. I have no memory whatsoever. So this is probably one of the greatest struggles for me. So this is what we can do. We can have visual support, especially of instructions. So younger kids and even adults will really take benefit from visual prompts in the instructions. Have a multi-sensory and multimodal approach. So write them and then read them. Maybe you can say them and then they can do at the same time. You can't have all three. Okay, and I want you to imagine you are learning how to do origami and you're watching a video on YouTube and we have the person talking and, so we are hearing, we are seeing what they're doing, and then we do the same thing at the same time. What's going to happen is that you're going to skip steps, or you're going to do what I do, like cheat and pause. Okay, they did that first. Okay, so now I'm going to make the folds and then click play. Okay, so we can't have all three channels at the same time because it's too much. We will lose concentration, we'll get frustrated. I mean, honestly, if you're not good at manual labor, there's manual work, crafts, there's nothing like doing origami to really frustrate you. So if you're going to do origami, you pause. This is the same thing. So you don't mix all three. If you're going to have visual, then make it added oral or kinesthetic. If you're going to speak, maybe get them to do it at the same time. So, and why is this? It's because studies show that children, for example, with dyslexia, profited more from hearing than just reading it. Because the dyslexic student looks at a word and starts to read the word. But the way that they read is really difficult because they try to pronounce every single letter to see what the word is. They don't recognize it just by sight. And here is what is the big difference between us, those of us who don't have dyslexia and those who do. Because they spend so much time working. So they figured out, working. And then they go to the next word, memory. Memory. Oh, what was the first word? So they read it again. So imagine all that mental, that mental exhaustion of these kids trying to work through things. So this is why multisensory and multimodal approaches are useful, because they can actually, if you can have, some text to speech tools, which I'll show you in a minute, these tools allow you to listen to it. So you can read and listen. Now, I don't think that because I know dyslexic students have issues with reading, that they should stop reading. No, they continue reading, but they're supported with listening. If you're tired, you're supported with listening as well. So these tools, the whole principle of UDL is not just for those who may need it, but it's for all, to make all our lives simpler. So technology, one of the things that it has is that once you know how it works, it's supposed to make our life a lot easier. Well, this is what we're doing. We're trying to take advantage of the tools, take advantage of what we've got, and find ways around it. So, for example, students show that students without dyslexia also benefited from the multisensory approach. And this is the key part. So, displaying high frequency words for students to see, for example, is also. So, how do we do this in the real world? Make posters in your classroom. So, what are you working on at the moment in your units? Currently, I'm on holidays. We come back in March here in Uruguay. So, I still have plenty of time. And one of the things that I'm planning on doing is that I always plan on having like posters of the units. So, what unit are you working on? I'll be working on poetry because I teach English language and literature. And in poetry, so we've got, for example, I want them to have these keywords, simile, metaphor, all of those. So we've got them displayed on the board, on the poster. And every time we're going to talk about poetry, we're going to go to the poster to make sure that those high frequency words that my students should have, they will have access to. But not only will it help those students who struggle, it will help those students in general who maybe have a mental lapse and metaphor, that's right, that's what we were talking about. Because a lot of the times we think that we shouldn't have posters, we shouldn't have this, we shouldn't have that, because in the exam they won't have that. It's true. They shouldn't have that in the exam. But not everything is about the exam. We want to teach our students. There will be time for exam practice. Let's teach our students, help make the most of what's around. The simple things like adding a poster. For example, these things help them create it. Don't you create everything. It's not all about us. It can be about them too. Ask students who struggle with maybe literary terms to get them to write those. Who struggles with vocabulary? Well, I'd like you to go to the book and create like a poster of the vocabulary that we'll be doing in this unit. You might think, oh no, but I haven't taught it. A lot of the times in our books, we open the books and we have matching exercises, or they can use a dictionary. They can go to Google Images. I tend to say, okay, Google the image and send it to me. I'll print it and we can paste it on, and we have a visual dictionary of that unit. Once that unit is over, remove the poster. Maybe take a picture, upload it to your classroom. If you have an LMS, if not, there's still, I will show you in a few minutes, a plan B. But it's all about trying to make the most of what we've got, the tools that are around us, and really help our students to move forward. We need to be also to provide organization tools, because kids, especially with bad working memories, are usually the ones that can't organize themselves a lot. So they can create word clouds, they can create Venn diagrams, they can create mind maps. All these three will make available, all the links will make available to you. I know mind maps, there are hundreds and thousands of different apps. I do like MindMeister because it works with Google Chrome, Google Drive. So if you've got a Gmail account, it's just stored in your Google Drive. And I think whatever is stored nice and neatly is good, especially with kids who don't have good organizational skills. Venn diagram I learned recently. It's in Canva. If you aren't aware of Canva, it's good for everything I see. It's always really good. Now, the second barrier that we face is the use of language. Students need to use language. That's a reality. It doesn't matter if you teach English, if you teach Spanish, if you teach whatever, students need to use language in ways to express themselves. So this is why allowing text-to-speech and speech-to-text tools are fantastic. If you look for, these are settings that you have. I'm sure all web browsers have the same, but if you go to the accessibility settings of any web browser, you will find for the blind. When you use different tools for the blind, it actually reads what you can see on the screen. So if your students are struggling a bit, maybe you've given them like a handout to read or something, get them to use the computer, or they can use an app as well to read. But these are simple tools. Here, for example, you can see that I just clicked, I highlighted, I right-clicked, I said speech, and then start speaking, and it read to me. If what you would need to do is you need to add English or English to your computer. So otherwise it will read, for example, my computer's in Spanish, if I don't change the language, it will just read, in Spanish with English with a Spanish wording. It's a lot of fun, but it's not what you should be reading. It doesn't translate. Allow speech to text, for example, Google Docs voice typing. Even in WhatsApp, you can click on the microphone instead of course, leaving a voice message. It can actually type for you. I do a lot of this, especially when I want to correct their pronunciation. I ask them to send a WhatsApp message, but just clicking, the icon, the microphone icon, and it actually types the words. I'm thinking, okay, so are you pronouncing correctly? No. Okay, you need to figure it out. For what we mentioned earlier about the high frequency words, this has to do with the use of language and also the use of working memory. High frequency words can be grouped and displayed. We can do word clouds, we can make them subject specific, we can create the mind maps again, but what we need to do a lot of the times is that we need to make sure that they are displayed in a way that it's useful, that students can go back easily. So for example, if you don't have an LMS, which is a learning management system, if you don't have a platform, you can always use Padlet. Padlet is like a notice board, but it's digital. It's free to use. In the next slide, you'll see the link. So what we've got here is that all of these tools, students can always come back to it. Because what happens is that we can't always have everything displayed in our classroom. It'll be chaotic and it'll be counterproductive. But when we use these tools with, in the mindset and thinking about it, they can become extremely useful. So let's find ways on how to make the most of what we've got and see how we can move forward. So all of these tools are of course, I'm giving you free tools because I think it's important to make the most of what we've got. And of course, I'm sure these all have paid versions as well. And it's always useful to have different versions. Concentration. This is probably the biggest barrier. And those of us who use technology in the classroom is probably going to be the worst, or the most thing that we struggle with, and we always, have a fight with our students. We always are trying to help them not to get distracted. Um, so the whole idea of concentration is we need to minimize threats and distractions. And this is what I meant. In concentration wise, observe what is the problem. So for example, I work at a school which is one laptop per child. This is a scheme that we've got in our country. A lot of the schools, public and private schools, have this now. That all public schools have that. Each child is given a device, a computer or a tablet. So in our classes, we can assume that we have these tools. Now the problem with this is that they get distracted because they put their WhatsApp on their computer, and that's probably the worst thing. They have different tabs all opened. They can get to video games and things. And of course, what can you do? You can do what we did at school. We can talk to the tech support team and say, okay, we need to block WhatsApp. We need to block these games. We need to block Netflix. We need to block. And what happens? You keep blocking everything, and kids will find a way. Because if they don't have Netflix, they've got YouTube. And if I block YouTube, I am the one that's suffering. So maybe instead of looking at the blocking of that, we need to explore to see why things are happening. So in concentration-wise, what is happening and what is causing my students to lose concentration? WhatsApp messages are extremely invasive. So I said, okay, please close the WhatsApp tab. I don't want to see WhatsApp on your computer. I don't want to see the app in your computer because I want you to focus. I sometimes sit at the back of the classroom so I can see all their screens, because when you know who they are, when they switch quickly, you can see who it is. So these are the distractions that I've had to deal with. Now, these are the ones that have to do with technology that becoming an issue. I'm not against having phones in the classroom. I'm against students not being able to use them in an academic and appropriate way. So because we have computers in the classroom, I don't allow them to use their phones unless it's actually justified. And leaving their computer at home or forgetting to charge it is not an excuse. It's not for me, it's not an acceptable excuse. So what we need to do with concentration in that sense is pay attention to what is distracting our students. So if that's distracting, get them to do certain things. Maybe some students are not good to use computers in the classroom. Because they get easily distracted. So maybe they need to go back to pen and paper. Maybe there are other things that we can talk about. Maybe you can have punishments and things in order to get them to understand that their focus of the classroom is what we are expecting and what is very much needed here. Write instructions on the board. I think this is a key part, and sometimes we forget, but also on the LMS, or if you're using Padlet, because that way students can always come back to, oh, this is what we did. I tend to do, when we do different tasks, I upload them to our LMS, to our platform. And also I have, like, if I'm in the classroom and I write the instructions on the board, I write them there. I usually, when they work in groups or something and I want them to have a handout, because I have the facility, of using my computers, my students all have a computer, I tend to do, I leave things on the platform. But also for the student who was away, at least can follow to see what we did. So have routines to call attention. How do you call attention in the classroom? In my classroom, I remember I used to come in. First year of secondary school is very difficult because we have, they're coming from primary school, one teacher, maybe two teachers. They were able to stand up and move. And in high school, we don't have that option. So I would have a routine to call attention to come into class. I would play a song in English, and they knew that they had the duration of that song to get ready. So they had to get their books out, they had to get their notebooks, have everything on their desk. But by the time they had that song, now the song would last 2 to 3 minutes. And I really only wasted 2 or 3 minutes. And you would think, oh, 2 or 3 minutes. Yes, but how many minutes did I waste calling their attention? How angry did I get every time that they didn't have their things ready? So mentally, it was a big saver for me. So it kind of like made me relaxed as well. Kids were relaxed and were ready to learn. And that was our routine. And then when I wanted to call their attention, maybe I would whistle, click my fingers, stand up if I was sitting down, trying to do this. A lot of the times we need to also think about is monitoring. We are taught, I remember my teaching practices, you need to monitor more, you need to walk around, and I don't disagree with that. But if students are working on something that's highly concentrated and they're using their computers, have them share that file that they're working on with you, and you can see in live without interrupting, without moving around. You see what they're working on, you know what they're doing, but you don't need to stand up and maybe cause, especially not all of us have comfortable classrooms that we can walk freely around. And definitely remove the clutter. I love when students create posters, presentations, and things and display them in the classroom, but they create a lot of distraction. If you need to have posters or whatever, have them in the back of the classroom. So posters of students' work, leave them at the back of the classroom, and then after the unit is finished, take photos, upload them to Padlet, upload them to your platform so there's visual, proof, and then remove them. Whether you get them to move, from home or whatever, it doesn't matter. But we need to remove this clutter. I know I said earlier about displaying high frequency words, but only for that unit. Our books are all divided into units. Only in that unit you use those words. Then once that unit is over, take them down. Maybe the students can take it home, take a picture, upload it to Padlet, whatever. But don't have everything on your classroom. We need to remove a lot of the clutter that we tend to have in the classroom, because we know it helps our students in their concentration. Another aspect of concentration is organization of work. Students are faced with a lack of knowing where to start a lot of the times. They have no idea. This is why I don't know if it's typical of English teachers that we have like models for writing, models for speaking, models for this. We are constantly showing them models. So what we can do here is that let's have this use templates. Take advantage of templates. If students can't display things in a neat, logical manner, create those templates and share them on their platform. If you can't do them on the computer, print it, take them there, but at least they've got a template. They know where to put information. So for example, every year I have a portfolio, a language portfolio where they look at their work, go back, reflection, a portfolio. So, but what I have is the template of the portfolio, and that's what I give to them. I have a digital one, so it's easier for my students, but for example, in the first page, they write their name and whatever. Second page starts with the contents, then we've got the units. So unit 1, we are working with this topic. We're going to be doing these forms of assessment, and we're going to be doing this. So they have everything clear cut. I love the wow factor. I love the surprise, but I think our students have changed from when we were young. I don't remember ever being told what I was going to do at school in that unit, for example. I would only be told you're doing this now, and you would never question it. And the whole idea of giving them that is not for them to question you, but it's for them to see that there's a logical order that students need to go from one to the others in order to be able to do the final product or whatever. But that way they can also come back and reflect. And this is what I like about creating those templates, is that the student who struggles in organization has, the titles, has this, all of these things that are taught specifically, and and I think it's explicitly, it's fantastic what they do in primary. Put the title, underline it, put the title in a different color, underline it in blue, red, whatever. All of these things are things that we need to be able to do. When I go in, because I get them in secondary, I assume, and I have them in the last 2 years of secondary, there's a lot of assumptions. And I'm very, shocked by sometimes their lack of organization. So let's give them templates, let's help them organize, get them to underline keywords, get them to have the language, the grammar, the vocabulary, all these things all separate so that way they can see it and then they can see how it's combined as well. So all this organization of work will be very useful. And again, if you share them, the templates, Google Docs, Google Slides, Padlet, whatever works for you. And of course, your students. And then the last barrier is the learning preferences. And this is why we need to celebrate diversity. So allow them to use technology as long as they prove to you that it's useful. For example, do you remember, I don't know if it's still in, in where you are, but I remember a few years ago, the poppets, and it's still there. It's those little plastic things that have to pop. They can go around, kids love those. And I remember a student said, "Oh, this is really good because it helps me concentrate." And I was looking at them, really? Does it help you concentrate? So I start to look, and what happens? The student who is easily distracted is worse. The student who has attention deficit disorder, it helps them focus. The student who doesn't need that, it doesn't help them. So what we need to do is we need to find ways of what helps our students. If technology is going to be a useful tool for that student, allow them to use it. Allow them to use, the computer, the pencil, the phone, whatever it is that's going to be useful for them. But if you see that particular tool is not working it's not helping them, then don't permit it. And are we making differences? Yes. But the difference are not in themselves, not in the people. We're making differences of what's useful and what's not. Respect timing, we know this. This is why when we give our students a clear idea of where they're going, if you give them the templates, when you organize the work and that they can see what they're doing, it allows them to be mentally prepared. They know that they're not ready. They know that they might need to continue to the next one. We need to respect the voice of our students. And I think this was probably one of the greatest benefits of the pandemic, because I know surprising benefits, but because we couldn't all see each other, some people wrote, some people spoke. It was asynchronous or synchronous. And I think this was fantastic because some students maybe need a little bit more time. And that's what we are respecting the voice of. Sometimes we don't always have the time to respect that voice. And I understand that. I am also a busy teacher, that in October my students sit for exams, and if they're not ready for exams, I there will be some downfalls to that. So we need to respect their voice. We need to respect who they are and how they can go ahead. How can they move forward? So give them the time. Maybe they can't share something today. Maybe, okay, would you like to tell me tomorrow? Prepare it, and then tomorrow you can tell me, or you can send it to me by email and we can look at it together in class. Because I don't want you to think that you have to do extra homework. The whole idea is take advantage of the class time. Respect anonymity. Some students might not feel comfortable speaking. Try to maintain their attention, and of course, promote reflection. And here is the key part, because special educational needs this reflection, needs to be able to have checklists, especially because this allows us to, we all have these students who may struggle in the classroom, who may need the use of different tools, but the checklist and the peer correction are fantastic ways of promoting that reflection. Like I said, the dyslexic student may struggle with reading, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to develop it. The student that has attention deficit disorder might struggle with organization. That doesn't mean that we're not going to develop it. But after we do a task, let's promote that reflection so we can move forward. So it's not always dependent on us, because the ideal situation would be that when they come to my class, when they're year 11 and 12, that they are more self-reliant. They don't depend so much on the teacher, because at university, they will not be given the tips and helps that they have been given along the way. So let's create this checklist. Let's create these peer corrections. And so it's not always us that needs to do everything, self-correction, peer correction, and questions such as why? How is this happening? Because this is what's going to truly help us become, this have this liberation. Let's use the tools we have and get rid of those barriers that are preventing our learners from moving forward. Those students who struggle, have students who struggle, and we know that. We need to be able to find those barriers that are preventing our students, because if you notice, the barriers that I mentioned have nothing to do with special educational needs, the titles, of attention deficit disorder, dyslexia, dyspraxia. It has to do with learning, because students might be a bit slower, might be fast learners, slower learners, but that doesn't mean that they have a special educational need. But they still need the time, because there's still a barrier that is there. So the whole point here is to remove these barriers in order to improve their learning qualities and really help our students to move forward. So I want to thank you all for joining me. I hope it was useful, and I'm free to answer all of your questions. Thank you.
What we
Okay, first of all, I strongly recommend to contact your schools. Heads of schools need to decide what the cybersecurity policies will be in place in your schools. Our school in particular we do have specific policies. We know what we can do, what we can't. So the first thing to do is to know that. Many of my suggestions had to do, of course, with technology, as it was the talk about. But the idea behind those suggestions is that you need to first decide what you have in your class, in your schools. So in our context, for example, especially during the pandemic, secondary, we've always had our LMS. So because our students need a school email, we have a closed LMS. It was really impossible for other students to access, or people who we didn't want to access. In primary school, we didn't have specific an LMS. Afterwards, during the pandemic, we saw the need, so we got one. In the meantime, we did use other sources, but only parents were given access. So, for example, Padlet, it's open. You can make it, like, when you share it, only specific to certain people. So that's what our teachers did in primary school. But first of all, make sure you know what the policies are in your school. And if you don't have any policies, there are many that you can download. If you go online, you can find certain general cybersecurity ideas, so that way you can make sure that you are up to code.
Thank you very much. That's a very good answer. We have a few more questions. One of the teachers in the chat asked you for advices on teaching a student, an adult woman who has a first level autism.
Okay, with autism, as you know, it's a spectrum. So it really depends on what spectrum they are. So the first thing, if it's an adult, more than likely they know themselves. So they might be able to give you, they probably have a diagnostic, so they might be able to give you that, I'm sure they've had some medical treatment or some follow-up, a report, so they could show you without breaking confidentiality, because it is a medical report, but at least tell you what specific areas they struggle with, what is the most, that sort of thing, what works for them, what doesn't. Depending on the level of autism has to do a lot with like structures. They like structure, routines, specifics, classification. So if you see the student enjoys classifying, for example, words, transport, and let's classify nouns and verbs. So verbs that have to do with transport, well, go, take, get in, get off, those sorts of things. And then a bus, a car, a plane. If that is something that they enjoy, that they find useful, because as I mentioned, an aspect of autism can be that classifying, that could be a solution to how you can approach certain things. And then you put them into boxes. So, okay, so when you want to form a sentence, you need the subject. So that when we do grammar, for example, with the formation, where we put subject, verb, question word, or whatever, depending on the type of sentence we make, they might enjoy that classification of, we don't know its language, so it's not always put things into boxes, but that's the first thing that you might do. But the first thing that I would do is talk to that student to see what their strengths are, how they like to learn. If they don't know, contact a parent, a relative, somebody. They're there for a reason. So if they tell you they have autism, that means they already know. So they should be able to tell you. Again, it's an adult. So, which is easier, I guess, than children when there's no clear diagnostic created. So it's an adult. Take advantage of that. Talk to parents. Talk to the adult themselves, and they'll be able to guide you.
Thank you. The other question I have is, if you think mobiles are the real problem about concentration and focus nowadays?
My question would be, how many times did we look at our mobiles while you were listening to the talk? To be honest, I think that sort of question, I don't think it's the mobile. I think it's us. Not us as teachers, but us as people. How many times do you look at your phone? Why are you looking at your phone? Maybe you've got an important call coming up, so you don't want to forget. Maybe you have, you're expecting a phone call, you're expecting somebody, or you're just bored. When I was at school, I didn't have a mobile phone in class, but I had a pen, and I would make all the fun drawings in my notebook. So I don't think it's the tool. I think it's the user, the problem. So maybe we need to think about what we are doing in the classroom. Are we trying to engage them? And then, of course, the student also needs to be held responsible. They need to be held accountable. Why are you looking at your phones? Are you expecting something? Well, maybe today's not the best day for you to be in class. Those sorts of things. But also think about the reality. How many times did we look at our phones? Maybe it was something that wasn't interesting that I was talking about, and that's valid. So I think it depends a lot on the moment and things.
Thank you. We don't have any more questions for now, but I'd like to thank you. It was a great session. We had so many comments congratulating you. I believe all the teachers found the session really helpful.
Well, I'm glad.